Bismillah. So in the previous video, we talked about istinja and a number of recommended manners when visiting the lavatory or using the restroom. In this next section, we're going to discuss the manners or actions which are disliked and some things which are impermissible in association with the same topic. Imam Mansur al-Bahuti rahimahullah ta'ala says, وَيُكْرَهُ دُخُولُهُ بِمَا فِيهِ ذِكْرُ اللَّهِ بِلَا حَاجَةٍ ورفع ثوبه قبل دنوه من أرض وكلام فيه وبوله في نحو شق ومس فرجه بيمينه واستنجاؤه بها بلا عذر واستقبال شمس أو قمر. So واستنجاؤه بها بلا عذر واستقبال شمس أو قمر. Here basically the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala says it is disliked to enter it, meaning the lavatory, with something that contains the name of Allah without need, except for the mushaf. Entering into the lavatory with the mushaf is impermissible, is haram. Allah's name is something that, I should say, Allah's name should be extolled and venerated. It should be glorified. And because the lavatory, the place we go to answer the call of nature, is typically a place of filth, or it might not be filthy, right? Most of us, we take care of our bathrooms. We even have very, very nice bathrooms. Many of us live in homes where the bathrooms are perhaps a focal point and a feature. However, it is used for what it is used for. It may not be filthy, but it is used as a place to remove excrement from the body. And I hope that's clear. Okay, so I don't want you to think like, well, my bathroom's clean, so I'm exempt. No, doesn't matter whether it's inside, outside, it's the bathroom, it's whatever it may be. Okay, so the lavatory is a place of filth, or it's a place where we dispose of filth. And so the objective there of glorifying and venerating Allah's name is undermined when you bring something in it that contains Allah's name, especially the mushaf. This is what contains the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there's a need, right? So he says without need. So if there is a need, and what would constitute a need? A need would be the possibility of losing something or having it stolen. So if you had no place to put it for safekeeping or someone to hold it for you, then in that case, the ruling would change. And if you were to go into it, then you should hide that or conceal that thing. Like, for example, if it was a ring with an engraving on it that mentioned the name of Allah, then you should turn it around. And that's what was reported to have been done by the Prophet ﷺ. He would ﷺ remove his ring when he entered the lavatory. And this was reported by the five, Rawal Khamsa illa Ahmad, rahimahullah ta'ala. The five narrators, obviously we've talked about that in the past. Or it was also reported that he would turn the ring around so that the engraving, which would normally be facing outward, was now in towards his palm, and it could be concealed so that the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which happened to be on the ring, was not facing the najasa, nor was it likely to get anything on it because it was being concealed. So the ring of the Prophet ﷺ, engraved on it was Muhammad Rasul Allah. So Muhammadun Rasulullah. Muhammadun Rasul Allah, in that order, which is what is apparent from the narrations. And the writing was flipped. It was opposite. It was backwards in order that the ring could be used as a seal or a stamp. So it would be used, you know how you would see they would put wax down, or they would use ink, and they would take the ring and make it a stamp, and then it would read properly Muhammadun Rasulullah. As opposed to what's become popular, and this is according to Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, based on the narrations and what has been reported. It wasn't Allah, Rasul, Muhammad, as if you're reading it from bottom to top, Muhammadun Rasulullah. It was more than likely Muhammad, Rasul, Allah in that order. That's just a side note. That does not have any real significance towards this particular manner. It's just disliked to bring anything into the restroom or the lavatory that contains the name of Allah. And of course, the Quran being an exception, as that is impermissible. It's also disliked to raise one's clothing without need, and if urinating while seated. meaning if you're going to be urinating while seated, it's disliked to raise your clothing before drawing near to the ground, okay? So it's kind of like if you're going to sit down or squat to use the restroom, you don't need to raise up all your clothes and then squat. You should, as instructed, raise the garment slowly as you are squatting, and this is more conservative, more concealing, that you're raising it as you are squatting to the point that by the time you squat, then you've exposed yourself right at the last moment. The garment should be slowly raised as one sits and then slowly lowered as one stands. And it's likely an obligation in the event that someone who is not permitted to see your aura is present. Okay, so this is a recommendation here to do it in this fashion, and likely an obligation if someone could possibly or potentially see who is not permitted to see. It's also should be noted here, he says without need, and if urinating while seated. So that's right, men can urinate in both positions, while seated or while standing. And it is permissible to stand and urinate so long as you're not going to get urine on your body or your clothes. You're not going to be soiled by the urine. If you don't fear being soiled by urine, then it's permissible to stand. It's mubah to stand while urinating. However, if you're worried that, it's going to splash on you or it's going to splatter or something's going to get on you because of standing, then you're going to need to change the position so that you can avoid that. He goes on and he says it is also disliked to speak while in the lavatory, be it obligatory or recommended speech, such as returning the salam, responding to someone who sneezes here, which would be obligatory. Recommended speech like repeating after the mu'adhin. These things can be done in the heart while not done on the tongue when you're in the lavatory. Or answering someone's question. If someone says, where's the tissue or something of that nature. If it's a dire need, maybe you could respond and it would not be disliked, but just having a chat, even some of the obligatory things would be considered disliked. However, helping someone out that could potentially hurt themselves, like a blind person, like if they're going to fall or there's a hole or there's a well or even there's a snake or something, and they can't see it, they can't detect it because they're blind or there's some dire need, in that case, the ruling changes and you have to help. It becomes an obligation that you point such things out. And the reason for this issue of speaking, why is this there? Some have said that the two angels that are charged to each person, they leave when we go into the lavatory to relieve ourselves. And if we speak, they're obliged to come back to record that. And they have to come back into the lavatory, which is, as I described, that place where we remove waste, and it's, sometimes impurities and filthy, etc. And so they come back cursing the one who has obliged them to come back. So here we're talking about the khala, which is the lavatory, and the nature of speaking there, the ruling of it. And so this is even more severe, or even more the case than the hammam, which would be like the place that you wash up in. So traditionally, those were two different places. The hammam was like, you've got the place for washing up. It's maybe like a public bathhouse or shower. And then you've got the mirhal, which is the toilet, the lavatory, or the khala, which is the outside kind of a situation. So the ruling applies to both, even more so to this than it does to that, because when you're in the lavatory, this is where you would expect there to be najasat and such, as opposed to a place where you just go to wash up. In Al-Ghunya, this is a work by the great Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, radiyallahu anhu. He said, one is not to speak, make mention of Allah or anything else beyond the tasmiyah and the ta'awudh. The tasmiyah being the bismillah, ta'awudh, a'udhu billahi min al-khubthi wal khaba'ith. And we talked about when and where those two things are mentioned in association with the lavatory. Imam Mansour goes on to talk about urination in a direction. He says it's also disliked to urinate in the direction of a crevice. However, it should be noted, It's also disliked to urinate in the direction of the wind, the blowing wind. Obviously, it may blow back on you. A crevice was prohibited by the Prophet ﷺ, as it is likely the nest of insects and possibly the home of the jinn. So here, check this out. I mean, you can see the merciful nature of our beloved Prophet ﷺ and the mercy that we should have towards other creatures, be they insects or be they jinn. We don't want to go urinating in their nests and their dwellings. It's also disliked to urinate in the shower, unless the floor surface is solid like cement or tile, okay? This is a recommendation by some water conservationists, especially in the world of commodes, where the commode is flushed and it flushes down with it a gallon or so of water. And so a person urinates into the commode and they flush a gallon of water down with that to kind of freshen the water, versus in the shower when you're already running the water and you may urinate in the shower. Some people might be going, oh my God, that's so gross. But guess what? It's there. It's in our tradition. The fuqaha, they've addressed this, way back when. This is actually can be found in Sharh Muntal Iradat. I've mentioned this book before as one of the authorships of Imam al-Buhuti rahimahullah ta'ala. And he says here that it's not disliked in this case, but it would require you to wash that off before you started to make a ghusl or wudu or whatever, so that that's not down at your feet and you're standing in it while you're trying to purify yourself. This was also explicitly, believe it or not, mentioned by Imam Ahmad radiyallahu anhu. So not only does it date back to al-Buhuti, but it also was addressed by the great Imam Ahmad as well. And he talked about even doing that in the place that you make wudu, urinating in the place where wudu is made. So not only in your shower, but like if you were in kind of like a scenario where it's just a faucet and there's a drain, if you were to urinate in that drain while it was cemented or it was a hard surface, basically the urine wouldn't be kind of held in dirt or sand, and you would be stepping in it and walking around on it and getting on your body. So there you go, conservationist. Keep up the good work, okay? It's also disliked to urinate in a large body of standing water and a small amount of running water. It's also disliked to touch one's organ, meaning your private part, with their right hand while urinating or otherwise. It was reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, do not hold your penis with your right hand while urinating, or clean yourself with your right hand after relieving yourself. So this hadith is explicit in addressing the use of the right hand while using the lavatory, going to the bathroom. So what's inferred here, so this is al-mantuq, and al-mafhum, what is said there and what is understood or what is inferred, is that you should not do that in any other circumstance as well, because relieving yourself is the most obvious time when you would need to employ a hand, I guess, if you will, in order to go to the restroom. So outside of that scenario, you wouldn't need to touch your private part, your organ, with your right hand, okay? So if, you shouldn't touch it while you're relieving yourself, then not touching it under normal conditions or circumstances is certainly to be expected. So here again, we are seeing how mantuq, what is said, versus al-mafhum, what is understood, is taken from such hadith. This is also the case for another's private part, which is permitted to be touched, such as a spouse or a child under the age of 7. And this is takriman lil yumna, right? We're basically honoring the status of the right hand and what it's used for. So you got to consider that dealing with, I know that there's intimacy issues and stuff that can be attached and surrounded with this. The right hand is used for all good things, positive, honorable things. Touching and fondling the private parts may not be that category. So, you know what I'm saying to you, hopefully. It's also disliked to make istinja with it, the right hand, without excuse. An excuse would be an injury or a paralyzation or even a severed limb. The right hand was just not functionable, is inoperable. And then you could, you were unable to use, for example, you can't use the right hand for istinja, so you're trying to use the left. You understand the meaning here. It's just you're unable to avoid using it. Then you can use your feet if possible, or another body part if possible. And if there's no possible way to do that, then you can have a spouse help you out to make Istinja or Istijmar. And then, of course, if you're absolutely in a desperate situation and there's nothing that you can do to take care of that, then you would just pray regardless the case. It's also disliked to face either the sun or the moon without a barrier between such light and a wall. Like without a barrier between that light and you, meaning like a barrier like the wall or something. And this is noted because it contains Allah's light. It's also been reported that the angels are with both the sun and the moon, and that Allah's names are inscribed upon them. Okay, so there are a handful of issues which are disliked, some manners which are considered makruh in association with the lavatory, relieving yourself. The next section is about what's impermissible. Imam al-Bahuti, he says, وَحَرُمَ لُبْثُهُ فَوْقَ حَاجَتِهِ وَبَوْلُهُ وَتَغَوُّطُهُ بِطَرِيقٍ أَوْ ظِلٍّ نَافِعٍ أَوْ مَوْرِدِ مَاءٍ وَتَحْتَ شَجَرٍ عَلَيْهِ ثَمَرٍ. It is impermissible for someone answering the call of nature to linger in the lavatory, longer than one's need, regardless the time or place, if it's at day or it's at night, it's at home or public restroom or outside, because they're left exposed beyond what is required. You have exposed your aura beyond what is required. And this is an indication that walking around exposed for no need is something that should be avoided. You should not be walking around exposing your aura without need and purpose. So some of the purposes would be using the restroom, bathing and showering, or intimacy with the spouse. Hanging out, chilling out, relaxing out, all that stuff, you're not taking naked days. Okay, that's just not what we're all about. Aura is meant to be covered. Even if you're by yourself, it should be covered. You should maintain the manners of modesty in all scenarios except for those in which there is a need to disrobe. All right? Need to disrobe. Otherwise, no. He goes on and he says, or to urinate or defecate in the traversed street or pathways or beneficial shade as indicated in a hadith, which states, stay away from the cursed. The companion said, who are the cursed? The Prophet ﷺ said, they are those who answer the call of nature in the public roadways or in the shade. This has been reported by Imam Muslim. And the same is applied to sunny areas that are used during the winter, like places you go to warm up in. As opposed to sitting under the shade, now you're sitting out in the sun. Picnicking in the shade versus going out in the sun to picnic in cold weather. Or areas of public meeting spaces. Those are also places that it is impermissible to urinate or defecate. Also a water source, and this is where people go to collect water. People go to collect their water there, so it's impermissible to urinate or defecate in those areas or under a fruit-bearing tree. So here we come back to that issue of screening yourself behind a tree to use the restroom. If it's a fruit-bearing tree, then it's impermissible to relieve yourself there. A fruit-bearing tree which is harvested, by the way, even if the harvest is inedible. So if it's a harvested a plant of sorts, even though it's not going to be consumed, you still have to avoid that tree. If the tree does not have fruit and does not produce beneficial shade, it is permissible because any excrement, urine, or fecal matter is likely to be washed away before any fruit is produced by the tree. So maybe this is before the time that it begins to ripen and the time of harvest. It's also impermissible to defecate in water, whether that's an abundant amount or meager, running or still. So you can't defecate in these bodies of water, with the exception of the sea. Okay, this large body of water, it's permissible, as well as places that have been created for such a purpose. So like latrines, public restrooms where you're having to defecate in water, even the commode has water in it. But this type of water has been designated and designed for this very specific purpose. Basically, that water is not going to be used it's been accounted for and it's been allotted for this purpose, and so therefore it is permissible to do so. Just like the public sewer system. It's also impermissible to directly face or oppose the qibla while exposed, meaning there's no wall or there's no mound or saddle or tree or animal in front of you to block that. So this is basically like when you're outside and it's just you and God's green earth, right? So to avoid that prohibition, you turn slightly off degree if you're far away from the qibla. Basically, if you're far away from the Kaaba, if you're far away, a slight degree is enough. Or using any other object to screen you will certainly suffice. Bahuti goes on and he says, وَيَسْتَجْمِرُ ثُمَّ يَسْتَنْجِي وَيُجْزِئُ أَحَدُهُمَا إِلَّا إِذَا جَاوَزَ الْخَارِجُ الْمُعْتَادَ فَيَجِبُ الْمَاءُ وَلَا يَصِحُّ اسْتِجْمَارٌ إِلَّا بِطَاهِرٍ مُبَاحٍ مُنْقٍ غَيْرَ عَظْمٍ وَرَوْثٍ وَطَعَامٍ. And here we're going to end, or I should say we're going to address some issues when it actually comes to istijmar. So we talked about istinja. Istinja is general. Istinja is when you use water or rocks or something like that. Istijmar is when you use a solid material, like a rock or like paper or wood or something. So here basically what we're saying is, once you have finished urinating and expressing the remaining urine from your body, istijmar is recommended to be made with a rock or something, followed by istinja. So istinja, now when you're talking about both of them together, istijmar is referring to the solids, and istinja is referring to using water. Okay, istinja with water. So this would be the order: to make istijmar, basically to wipe yourself, and then to spray yourself. Doing it in the opposite order, spraying yourself and then wiping yourself for the purposes of removing impurity, is disliked, because the backward order is of no benefit. And this is based on what Aisha radiallahu anha said: order your spouses to use rocks and then water. She says, for I am too shy. The Prophet ﷺ used to do that. So here Aisha is talking to the women folk, telling them to order their husbands to follow this protocol. Istijmar, use rocks, follow that with water. I'm too shy to do that. So here you can see the role of the spouse at times teaching the other the manners which are irrelevant to them. Even some of them may be gender-based manners. So there's nothing wrong with a woman who has knowledge of the Islamic manners pertaining to men specific. And some of those we talked about, how to, handle your genitalia when cleaning up after the bathroom. Or a man, so she can tell her husband that in the event that he doesn't know. Or a man who knows about menstrual cycles and how to handle purification from menstrual blood or postpartum bleeding, and the wife doesn't know that. There's nothing wrong with the man who has that knowledge explaining that to her. And that was the role of the Prophet ﷺ. He would teach the women about these rulings. Okay? It should not be looked at with any strange attitude, like he's mansplaining, or the woman is ill fit to talk about men's issues. What we're interested in is knowledge, not the gender that carries the knowledge. I mean, gender has a role in Islam, there's no doubt about it, and there are things which are obviously specific to men and specific to women, but imparting that knowledge doesn't have to be from the same gender. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is because it has become an issue in today's world, where the men of the ummah and the male scholars of the ummah, especially in the past, are now being looked at in a very different lens, as if it is some sort of patriarchy that has mounted against the Muslim women. No, Muslim men honor and adore Muslim women and respect Muslim women, and are here to help Muslim women as they would hope that the Muslim women, their counterparts, would help them, even if that meant teaching and imparting knowledge, as is the case with Aisha radiallahu anha in this example. So, having said that, this is the order. Istijmar followed by Istinja, and this hadith was reported by Imam Ahmad and Nasa'i and at-Tirmidhi. So this method is considered not only more effective, but it's also cleaner. That you use the solid and then you use the water. And using the solid is what removes the actual matter, the physical matter, the impurity. The matter of the impurity itself, it removes that and may leave behind traces of that. And those traces are pardoned. Whereas the water removes the traces. I mean, the water, if used by itself, will remove both the matter and the traces so long as the water was used in abundance, used enough, coupled with washing and scrubbing that area. And then, obviously, you would be sufficed by that. And so that's what the Imam says. Either istinjat with water or istijmar with a solid will suffice. And if only water is used, which is better, if you're having to pick one over the other, you go with the water. It should be poured in abundance. It must meet the minimum number of pourings, and the area must be washed to remove any solid matter, unless the excrement exceeds the usual area, right? So if excrement, either urine or fecal matter, were to spread from where it normally is coming out of the body, which is right around the opening, if it were to spread beyond that to an abnormal place, like your leg or your thigh or something, another part of the body, you could not use a solid to remove that. The only thing that would suffice would be water. And in this case, you would have to wash it a minimum of 7 times. And this would require water because the use of solid material is a concession for istijmar. It's not like the standard. It's a concession. And the concession is meant to bring about ease due to the high frequency of answering the call of nature. You know, it's something that is done regularly throughout the day, but like getting urine or excrement on your leg or your foot is not something that happens on the regular. And so we go back to the base ruling, which is to use water as the purifying agent to remove such things from the body. Istijmar is only valid with something pure and solid, permissible, not something forcefully taken, stolen, or endowed. If such an item is used, it is not valid, it is sinful, and then requires water. That's the only way that you can purify the location. And because it is a concession, it is not permitted to be done in a sinful manner. So basically, like, you know, if you took somebody's belonging wrongfully, or you stole something and you used that to do istijmar, like you stole toilet paper, in the run on toilet paper, right? There's a scarcity of toilet paper, I don't know, and you go and you steal toilet paper. The toilet paper is stolen, that's haram, and you can't employ something haram in a concession. And if you were with us for Bidayat al-Abid, which you likely were, you would remember that combining and shortening prayers during travel is a concession, and therefore it cannot be done if the nature of travel is sinful. And here you can see another example of that. Let's see, it also has to be cleansing such that it will remove the material, the impure material. And it's neither bone or dried dung. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited such an act regardless of the object's state of purity, because it could be pure like dung, or it could be impure dung. It could be najis or not, depending on the animal. So regardless of that, it can't be used, nor food. Even if it's food for animals like fodder, you cannot use food to clean yourself with. Using these types of objects, it will not be sufficient. Basically, it won't count for you. Also, using a smooth object like glass or a very smooth piece of wood, which cannot remove the impure material, will not suffice. Or you could, or potentially, to fully understand, you could use one object that has multiple sides, or like a tissue that can be folded to multiple clean, fresh sides. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 3 tissues or 3 pieces of cloth. It could be one that's large enough that you can fold over so that you have fresh, clean sides for each time you pass and wipe over to remove that excrement or that filth. So essentially, there are 5 things, 5 conditions to meet. It must be solid, it must be pure, cleansing, not something sacred like food or books of knowledge, or a living creature or a part of a living creature, believe it or not, like the tail of an animal or something, if you're desperate, right? And it is not impermissible. So, I'm sorry, the sacred things are like food, books, living knowledge, and living creatures. And the fifth one is that it cannot be something impermissible. So here, in conclusion of this this chapter, Imam al-Buhuti says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ الثَّلَاثُ مَسَحَاتٍ مُنْقِيَةٍ تعم كل مسحة المحلة فإن لم تنقى زاد ويستحب قطعه على وتر ويجب لكل خارج غير ريح وطاهر وما لا يلوث ولا يصح وضوء ولا تيمم قبله. Basically, he says 3 cleansing wipes which encompass the area are requisites. If the 3 obligatory wipes, do not cleanse, how would you know if they cleansed or not? This is determined by the complete removal of any physical matter, such that only traces remain behind. If that is not obtained with those 3 wipes, more must be done until the area is cleaned. So the minimum requirement is 3. So if you were to wipe yourself with that solid object and the first wipe, you realized you're clean now. You got it all. It's done. There's nothing left but trace elements. You still have to follow it up with the 2 remaining obligatory wipes. If at 3 you realize, look, I'm not finished. It still needs to be cleaned. You have to add number 4 or number 5 or number 6 until you have cleansed the area, and it is preferred to stop with an odd number, such that if the area is cleansed with 4 wipes, an additional wipe is added, so that you end with 5. And this is based on the Prophet ﷺ saying, if any of you make istijmar, do it in odd numbers. Continues as either istinja or istijmar is obligatory due to every excrement, meaning everything that excretes out, that exits a tract, regardless of what it is, besides flatulence, like passing wind. As the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever performs istinja due to passing wind is not from us. And Imam Ahmad concluded that istinja due to flatulence cannot be found either in the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Right, so that is just not the way of the people of the Sunnah. It may be a way for other people, but it's not the way for us. It is also not needed for a pure object, such as orgasmic fluid that has excreted from a person who is in a state of purity. Basically means like this is aftermath. Okay, you've already purified yourself from major ritual impurity, and now this kind of like apathetically just excretes out. It's like, aftermath here. Because it's pure, it doesn't require any purification. Also, a child born without the presence of blood or fluid. Probably a medical rarity, but it's not ruled out. And what has not caused the area to be soiled, such as dry excrement, which leaves neither matter nor trace. And this is something that was reported during the time of the companions when they were under the extreme circumstances of starvation and dehydration. And someone reported having gone to the restroom and leaving themselves, and there was no moisture in their stool content. Certainly not enough to leave any traces behind or matter. The last part, he says, neither wudu nor tayammum for either a hadith or a khabith are valid before it, for those who require istinja or istijmar, because it's a prerequisite for ritual purification. Those areas have to be cleansed before you can begin purifying yourself. This is because, or based on the hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, which states, he washed his penis and then made wudu. In the description of the Prophet's purification, and the wording here in this hadith basically proves necessity of order. It goes in order. It doesn't say he did this and that. He says he did this and then that. And so the order is important here. A last note to end this, okay, as good manners, etc. It's recommended to remove any odors from that region of the body. And there's nothing wrong with checking to see if there are any odors present. And you can do so in any way, even with your hand. You can check and you can smell your hand, and then certainly you can wash that afterwards. It's highly recommended to wash as well, if that's the way that you check, because as Muslims, not only are we well-mannered, but we are presentable and we are clean and odor free. And that's where we will conclude this section. Jazakallah khair.